Good afternoon. I'm Tom Putnam, Director of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, and on behalf of Tom McNaught, Executive Director of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, and all of my library and foundation colleagues, I thank you for coming and acknowledge the generous underwriters of the Kennedy Library Forum's lead sponsor, Bank of America, Raytheon, Boston Capital, the Lowell Institute, the Boston Foundation, and our media partners, the Boston Globe and WBUR. Before coming to the library, I directed a federally funded program that helped low-income high school students to be the first in their families to go to college, which prompts two brief anecdotes. I recall the story of an alumnus from the program who marked as a turning point in his life the moment during his first summer on the Bowdoin College campus when his upward-bound Shakespeare teacher looked him in the eye and said, "You read the part of King Lear." A life transformed by art. Of course, seeking such transformations is not without its hazards. One summer evening, I took a group of students to the opening of a new exhibit at the campus art museum and watched from across the room as one of my charges picked up an entire wedge of brie cheese, thinking it was some type of vanilla cream pie, and took a hefty bite. The look of horror on his face was matched only by that of the waitstaff as they watched him put the remaining tooth-marked wedge back on the serving plate. You're likely familiar with the types of towns from which these students from central and northern Maine hailed if you've read Richard Russo's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel Empire Falls. In his New York Times review, A.O. Scott writes, "By the end of this novel, you know this geography like a native, and its tattered landmarks, the Empire Grill, the old Whiting shirt factory, will be as vivid and as charged with metaphor as Salem's House of Seven Gables or the mansions of East Egg. You'll also have had the good fortune to tour this unremarkable landscape in the company of an amiable, witty raconteur who knows all the gossip and the local history as well as some pretty good jokes. Only after you've bought him a beer, shaken his hand, and said goodbye will it occur to you that he's also one of the best novelists around." Of course, there's much wisdom in Mr. Russo's wit, such as the advice Hank Devereaux in the novel Straight Man offers one of his overzealous students after reading the aspiring writer's short story, quote, "Always understate necrophilia." In addition to being award-winning author, Richard Russo is a member of the Hemingway Council at the Kennedy Library, which helps support our work in preserving the papers of Ernest Hemingway that are housed here. Marianne Leone is an actress, screenwriter, and essayist. She notes in her biography that she grew up in a small blue-collar enclave of Newton called the Lake. There was actually no lake in the lake, as the original had dried up, and all that remained was a green, slicked puddle on the site of a factory. Her parents were Italian immigrants, and her father operated a small working men's bar, Leone's Cafe. Having attended Catholic school as a kid, she wanted to be a saint, a reporter, and a cowboy. She reports, "I didn't become a saint, but I married a cowboy and sometimes write for the Boston Globe." Let me note that her husband, the actor Chris Cooper, is also here with us today. Ms. Leone is a successful actress in her own right, having appeared in films directed by John Sayles and Martin Scorsese, and in a recurring role on The Sopranos for 4 seasons. About her memoir, Knowing Jessie, she writes, "The book is about my son, whose luminous presence expanded and transformed everything else in my universe. I wrote the book to celebrate his life, to deal with his death, and to share him with others." A foundation has been set up in Jessie's name, which supports inclusion and adapted sports for disabled people, as well as disabled orphans in Romania. Finally, the book that served as the impetus to bring us all together this afternoon is the widely acclaimed memoir Townie by André Dubus III. I've never read a better or more serious meditation on violence, its sources, consequences, and especially its terrifying pleasures, writes Richard Russo. It's a brutal and yes, thrilling memoir that sheds real light on the creative process of 2 of our best writers, André Dubus III and his famous, most revered father. You'll never read the work of either man in quite the same way afterward. You may not view the world in quite the same way either. Mr. Dubus is also the author of The Garden of Last Days and The House of Sand and Fog, which was a National Book Award finalist, and he has often been on this stage before as part of our annual Penn Hemingway and Penn Winship Award ceremony. I should note there will be an opportunity to have books signed at the end of the forum, and if you've neglected to bring your own copy, books by each author are on sale in our museum store. Ernest Hemingway's life was transformed by art, and his fiction helped transform literature as we know it. There was a revolutionary nature to both how Hemingway wrote and the subject he dared to write about. Among the letters housed upstairs are many between Ernest Hemingway and his parents, who were shocked by some of his early stories and novels that embarrassed them among their friends and offended their Midwestern sensibilities. In a letter to his father, Ernest explained, "I'm trying in all my stories to get across the feeling of actual life, not to just depict life or criticize it, but to actually make it alive, so that when you read something by me, you actually experience the thing. You can't do this without putting in the bad and ugly as well as the beautiful, because if it is all beautiful, you can't believe it." Please join me in welcoming 3 authors whose writing makes life come alive in exceptionally believable forms: Richard Russo, Marianne Leone, and André Dubus III.
Thank you. Are we all mic'd? Can you hear? Can you hear us?
Hello.
Yeah. Okay, we're good. Well, thank you all for coming. This is a full house. I guess that's what happens when Keith Richards shows up the week before. Is Keith here today? We might as well get this out of the way right now if he is. Seriously, thank you so much for coming today. We are going to talk today for an hour or so amongst ourselves about art and its transformative power, especially as it applies to those of us who come from blue-collar backgrounds. And I thought I would begin just by saying, making note of the fact that William Gay, the novelist and short story writer, fine novelist and short story writer, from Tennessee, died this week. And I think it's his life and his art provide a kind of entrance, I think, to what we're going to be talking about today. Gay started writing, my understanding from what I've been reading in his various tributes and obituary, started writing at a very early age, around 15, I gather, but never really achieved any success in writing until really middle-aged, I guess advanced middle age. And there is every reason to believe, according to several of the reviewers that I've been reading about, who say that that art, right from a very early time, had already transformed his art, and when he became famous, or as such famous as the kind of famous that writers get, it certainly changed his life again, and yet people who knew him all said that he was ultimately, after he got famous, the same guy he had been all along, a guy who spent the vast majority of his days, every day, of every week, hanging drywall. That's what he had done to support himself for all these years when he was writing stories. So art does have the power to transform, but I suppose it means, in some sense, depends on what we mean by that. And so some of those things are what we're going to try to talk a little bit about today. Marianne, if it's okay, I'll start with you. And just a kind of both philosophical and very, very basic question. And with you, we get a twofer, because you are both an actor,
right,
and a writer. You were writing screenplays before you,
right,
before you wrote your memoir, and you've been an actor for a while. The kind of simple but deceiving question I would ask is, if you can remember your life before art, does it seem to you now that you are essentially the same person you were before acting came along and before writing came along? Or do you feel like a different person?
Well, the tics are gone. I say that because before I was exposed to art in any way at all, I went to Catholic school for 12 years, and I had tics from, the nuns were obsessed with martyrdom. And so I started and not sleeping at night. So, but I realized afterwards that it's all just fodder for art, of course. And even when I go to Italy now and I look, I look at those incredible, Santa Ludovica by Bernini, and I think, well, at least we've got some art out of it. I mean, the tics, the tics are gone. But yes, I know exactly the moment when, acting-wise, I was in college. I went to UMass Boston, all I could afford. Nuns would not give a recommendation for non-Catholic colleges. And I went to UMass Boston, and I got up on stage, and I did Winnie from Happy Days, Beckett's Winnie. And I thought, this is like sex, but it's as good, and I think I can make it go on longer.
And people watch.
So basically, that was the acting thing. But I had written too.
People will watch sex too.
But I had written too in high school. I had written a play called Escape to Ghent, where everyone
Escape to where?
Ghent.
Ghent.
Well, it's kind of based on the Peer Gynt Suite,
all
but
right.
not.
Okay.
Because everyone drowned in sewage at the end. It's a little angry child. But yes, I do think it changes you in that way, and that you feel more, you don't feel as weird about your feelings once you get to channel them into something. I think that's a major change. You don't feel as much like a weirdo.
Yeah. And so that's the kind of first moment, and you feel changed, you feel transformed by that. But now you've been both writing and acting for a while. Does it seem to you that the transformation is, I don't want to say complete, because we all continue to work and the transformation continues, but have you ever kind of lost track of the kid you were before this happened? Do you feel a kinship with that other person, or is that other person just gone?
No, that other person isn't gone, because I mean, weirdly that you should ask that is I'm attempting something new. This time I've written nonfiction exclusively, except for in screenplay, and now I'm writing fiction, and it's a coming of age. So yeah, I'm remembering that a lot, and I'm trying to go back through the spyglass of time, other end, and connect with that.
Yeah.
Andre,
how about you? Do you feel like the same person you were? Or do you essentially feel more the same than different? If you can go back to the 15, 16, 17-year-old you were, or maybe because I mean
it's a great question, because I mean, one of the things, as you know, this memoir I've written, Townie, was completely accidental. It came from an essay I was writing about my sons in baseball, and the word to remember means to put back together again. The opposite is dismember, chop, chop, chop. Remember means to put back together again. And so what I'm getting at is, having written this memoir, which came out of an essay, and then having read from it around the country, and having looked at my life now in the way I've tried to capture it in that moment from about age 9 to 29 of my life, I actually have a different insight than I had when I was writing it, which is art absolutely transformed me 180 degrees from where I was. I was an angry, violent young man, and almost immediately when I began writing, I didn't want to punch anyone anymore. I just didn't. And if you haven't read my book, you have to know I'm not a lover of violence. I hate violence. I was a little kid. I was bullied a lot. Probably went to 12 schools before I got to high school, and I became an angry kid who learned to fight and express myself that way, until I found myself one day, one way to control my violence was I was training for the Golden Gloves down in Lynn, in Lowell, which sounds impressive. It just means I had an AAU number. But I was trying to control my street violence by boxing, and one night, instead of going to the gym to box, I sat down. And to this day, I still don't know why I sat down to do this. It makes me believe, not in the nuns, but in the divine. Something made me sit my ass in a chair with a pencil.
People will make that distinction.
Yes, yes, right. Yeah. Not that some nuns are quite lovely, I'm sure. I've never met one myself. And something made me write from the point of view of a woman, of all things, a young woman losing her virginity on the hood of a Pontiac in the misty rain in the Maine woods. Doesn't that sound comfortable, ladies? So, I don't know what, something made me sit down and do that instead of going to the gym to box, and I was very serious about training and competing in the Golden Gloves in Lowell, and almost immediately I found myself doing this daily, this meditative act of trying to, as a woman writer whose name escapes me, you two might remember, but she said the writer's job is to enter the private skin of another, which is also the actor's job and probably the choreographer, dancer, many artists' jobs. And I found I couldn't try to enter the private skin of another human being imaginatively, and then that night, if I'm in a bar and some guy backhands his wife, I would still jump in, but I didn't see him in the blacks and whites that I was seeing him in as a 16, 17-year-old angry kid. You know, I think, but what I'm getting at is, so these were big insights I had writing Townie, but since then, I think that actually art put me back where I was before I began. I think actually I was probably a sensitive, observant little kid who got brutalized by the neighborhoods I lived in and by the culture that we are raised in. I think it's better now for my sons in this age, but I still think I hid the fact that I secretly liked having to write a paper on Walt Whitman. I remember once, you know, we were assigned, I mean, you know, I would miss 60 or 70 days of school in my high school in Haverhill, Mass. In the 70s. But the few times I went, I always loved English class. And one day, the woman assigned a paper on the leaves of grass. And I literally remember leaving the homeroom, and one of the local degenerates, we all had hair down to our waist with leather jackets and dingo boots and buck knives. He says, "What, you gonna write a paper on that homo?" And the truth is, I said something like, "Oh, no, of course not." But yes, I am. In fact, I love his work, whether he's a homo or not. Yes. And I stayed up till 2 in the morning writing that paper, and I snuck it to the teacher the next day. Yeah. But yeah, I absolutely transformative for me completely.
Yeah.
How about you?
I wonder if what we're talking about, among other things, is empathy, because I remember. This is something else we might want to talk about a little bit later too, because I did this PhD in literature before I ever started to write, and you know, we see all the time. We see people say that if we're lucky enough, they might even say it about something we've written. Your book changed my life. But we've all talked with people and said, what are the books that changed your life? And we can all rattle off half a dozen at least books that we say changed our lives. But I was finishing up a PhD, and those things take a while. So, you know, after my undergraduate work, I also did an MA and then a PhD, and it took me longer than it might have taken anyone else in this room. But it took me 7 or 8 years to do that whole route. But I remember at the end of that, despite the fact that I had been studying literature and gotten pretty good at reading, pretty good at decoding books, and there were books that I could say in that way changed my life. Moby Dick kind of changed my life in that way that a book can. The Great Gatsby certainly did. But what I find interesting is that it didn't change my behavior, which is a distinction that seemed significant to me, because when I started writing fiction, we're talking about the difference between the practitioner now and the receiver of the art. When I started actually doing it and having to write from the point of view of a woman or an elderly person, or just really anybody who, as you say, anybody who is not you.
Right. The other.
When you start seeing something, when you start imagining something from somebody else's point of view, what you're doing is simply empathizing, right? You're putting words on a page, but you're empathizing. And I remember that I certainly wasn't any good at it yet. But what I sensed, even in those early, really failed efforts at writing fiction, what I remember was the feeling that something in my core being was changing. It didn't seem to be software exactly. I wasn't tinkering with a program. You know, I wasn't making little changes. It seemed to me that I was making a big change. You know, we hear today about all the ways that children are learning differently because of technology. The brain actually gets restructured as a result of certain habits that we have as we go about in the physical world, whether it's how we use our thumbs or whatever it is. The way we do things actually impacts our brains, the way we learn, the way we function. And I couldn't have articulated this then. But it seems to me that what I was experiencing, even when I was writing really crappy stuff, was a fundamental rejiggering of who I was, the way I went about in life when I wasn't writing.
Yeah.
Which is why, to go back to the other question that I kind of asked, is that I do at times find it very difficult. Maybe I don't want to, but I find it very difficult at times to locate the person that I was before I started making those changes in the circuitry that allowed me, it did transform in some way.
But can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
How would you describe,
you should interrupt.
How would you describe that person you were, as opposed to the one you started to become as the novelist?
Well, I can think of several words. Probably shouldn't. I'm not sure they've been uttered in the Kennedy Library. Well, Keith Richards was here last week, so I'm sure they have been uttered at the Kennedy Library. No, I think that when I say that I had studied literature without it really changing me, I had studied it. I had somehow managed to dive in the deep end of the pool and not get wet. Yeah. In some way, you know, I was reading things and I was understanding them with a part of my brain, but as I said, they weren't changing my behavior. And at that time, I was not a person that I was always proud to be.
But they weren't changing your behavior because you were in a cultural place where it was dangerous to change your behavior. I'm speaking as a woman.
Yeah.
I mean, coming from a blue-collar background, coming from a first-generation immigrant background, you're not exactly encouraged to express yourself, shall we say. You basically have a path that you're going to. In my case, it was expected of me that I basically not go to college, that I marry a guy from the neighborhood and produce children, and it was not. So to be transformed, there's a whole other aspect to being transformed. It's actually having the nerve to think that you're worthy of expressing yourself, because, I mean, I'm sure you've never heard "shut up, you're a girl," but I have.
I've heard "shut up, you look like a girl."
You had him one up me.
That's a fist bump right there, baby. Fist bump. Can I talk about reading?
See, what Andre's a nice guy. He's what he's not going to tell you is that I was the one that said that.
You can't punch a Pulitzer Prize winner. Not allowed. You know, I'm thinking about, as you're talking, I think about how, again, this whole transformative thing. And I'm thinking about my own experience. I was a very controlling young man. I was trying to control my environment. I was trying to control my environment, which was a dangerous environment. I wasn't ducking bullets, but I was ducking, you know, fists and feet and, you know, insults and an occasional knife. And it was a scary childhood. It wasn't by far, they're far worse, but it could have been better. And my point is, one of the things I found when I began to read and write, so it's interesting we're talking about both in tandem. I actually did not start reading until I became a writer. I got a degree in sociology and political science, University of Texas at Austin, but I read very little literature, very little. and I write about this, and I know that you both have moments like this from your lives and your childhoods. You know, my best friend at the time is a kid named, well, I'll give you his fictional name in my memoir, Townie. His name is Cleary. He ended up dying young, being stabbed to death by his girlfriend, who he physically abused, frankly. And, but we were best friends when we were 13, 14 years old, 15 years old, and he walked into my house. So my mother was, you know, we talk about, you two actually have more purely blue-collar roots than I do. I'm actually from this strange social class we don't talk a lot about in America, which is the educated working poor. My mother comes from mule skinners and rice farmers. Her father had a third-grade education. He was a pipe fitter from Louisiana. My dad had more education on his side, but not much. His old man wasn't a college graduate. But what we had in my house were books. We had art on the walls from the art colleagues of my dad's liberal arts college where he taught. And even though my parents divorced when I was young and they were always broke and never owned a house and it was always scrappy, I lived in these neighborhoods with my blue-collar working-class brothers and sisters, but they had no books in their houses. I mean, I remember Cleary had one book. It was the Illustrated Bible. And it was on the, you know, next to the TV guide. And I remember Cleary came over to my house, and the first time he came into our house, which was always an embarrassment because the house was a disaster, but there were all these books on these shelves, and he went up and he touched me. He says, "Wow, are these friggin' real?"
Yeah.
And I knew what he meant, and I didn't make fun of him because I understood. He thought the only books he'd seen were the fake displays in furniture stores. You know, you put it, to look like books.
Yeah, yeah.
I said, yeah, and I pulled one out, and the truth is, I never pulled one out. All right, there was a Philip Roth novel with a really good sex scene.
Yeah.
I believe it was Goodbye Columbus, and I would take that out. Page 372. Panties off, everything. But this whole notion is, I began to read and write at the same time, and this is a wonderful line from an O'Brien essay called The Magic Show we've talked about before. And if you're a writer or interested in writing, you should read Tim O'Brien's essay, The Magic Show, about writing. He's got this one line. He says he thinks that writers tend to be the kind of people who want to enter the mystery of things. Just enter the mystery of things. To me, that is so the opposite of controlling a room. You really are just diving into the questions, and there are no answers at all. And when I was a young controller of my environment, usually through fist fighting, I was trying to control everything. And one thing that I found so wonderfully liberating about trying to write stories is, and early on, I'm curious if you guys did this, early on I would actually rescue my characters from bad stuff. So I was controlling it still, and I realized, you know, hey, let him be mean to his kid. So, but it's so mean. But it was killing the story. So I finally learned after about like 10 years, all right, I'm just let this shit hit the fan in this story. Yeah. And then I was a more honest writer. Right. But I think that's another way that I found that the pursuit of trying to make art has transformed me is I'm much more of a witness and not a participant. That's not to say I'm going to watch a bad thing happen on the street. I will jump in, but for the rest of it, I want to see how it turns out without me controlling it.
Yeah.
Do you identify?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Of course, I was not a Golden Gloves boxer.
Well, you could be, Marianne.
And I, too, was an observer. And I remember I realized that I lived in my head, though. Totally lived in my head. When I was doing research for this coming of age I'm doing now, one of my girlfriends actually kept all the notes we passed in high school.
That's great.
Oh, it was amazing.
What a treasure trove.
Yeah, except when you get a good look at yourself up close and personal, not so great. Their notes were, can I borrow your gray tight skirt for CYO on Friday? My note, I'm not kidding you, said, I know what the title of my autobiography will be. It will be Moloch, Moloch, Nightmare of Moloch.
I think that title is still available.
So, yeah. I guess I was an observer, but it did not go unnoticed how weird I was. So,
yeah.
You were observing that you were an observer, and you hoped everyone else noticed how brilliant you were doing it.
It's true.
Right.
But as my mother used to say, you know, Marianne, you're so smart, you're stupid.
Well, our backgrounds are not identical. Andre, you had a writer father, so there was some way in which, in the back of your mind, writing, at least in the back of your mind, must have been. You would have thought yourself at least decently suited for it, having.
Yeah, it wasn't as foreign to me as it obviously for you two.
And our backgrounds are not identical, as you've pointed out. But I wonder, Marianne, since you brought it up, the question of kind of hardscrabble roots. Is it more difficult? Let's just make it a matter of money and culture. Is it more difficult for art to transform somebody who comes to art without a background?
I think that the idea to my parents that I would now try to make a living from the arts was just absurd.
Yeah.
Absurd. The children of nobles did that in Italy. It's not. It was just stupid, the idea of that to them. And I saw their point. I mean, I didn't see how I could really make money from it.
Yeah.
You know, but I wanted to do it.
It was not an entirely stupid
No,
option.
it wasn't. But I just wanted to do it. But
Yeah.
I think it won't stop you from doing it, but I think it will stop you from pursuing when you hear, it's ridiculous, you're not. And you have the very real things of survival. You know, I mean, part of the reason we survived when we were starving actors in New York was that Chris was a master carpenter and could do
Another drywall hanger.
Another drywall hanger.
This is the true path, as it turns out, to art is drywall.
Don't forget me.
That's right.
Yeah.
But as a teacher too, I always wondered about those students. How many artists are lost? You know, teaching. Andre, you teach now at the Lowell branch.
Do.
Yep. And I did a lot of teaching at large state universities with kind of first-generation college students. You always wondered about those students who came up and they were just dying to do what they wanted to do, and you were somebody that could help them. But then, the father was saying, as long as I'm paying the bill for you to go to school, you're not going to be an English major. You're going to do something that a job is going to be at the other end of. So the kid that comes in with that may have some pressures at home, but what I've never been able to get out of my mind, and I'll tell you a little story here because it kind of hints at what was behind the question of whether art is always transformative or whether it is sometimes transformative, and whether there are some people who, for one reason or another, simply cannot be transformed by art no matter how much they would like to. When I was teaching at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, one of the best students that I had, and a poet, colleague of mine, Rodney Jones, had, was this kid. And I don't remember his name. He wasn't a kid. He was probably in his late 20s. And he was a wonderful writer. And I think Rodney and I were the first people ever to tell him that. I don't know whether he'd ever shown anything that he'd written before, but he was a natural. And where all the other kids were spinning lies, he was telling truth. He was telling the truth about his life. And he came from a tiny town along the Ohio River. And I remember Rodney and I sitting him down, but he was more into fiction writing than poetry, so I was seeing more of him. And one day, I sat him down after we'd had a semester or two together, and I said, look, is this something you really want? Because if it is, you have the necessary talent, but you have to want it. You're going to have to go all in. You're going to have to consider the possibility that this is something that you want to do with your life. And I could see him just almost begin to shake. And it wasn't long after that he dropped out of the university. And Rodney and I finally found out that he had gone back home and was working in a video store. And Rodney and I had many conversations about this man because it seemed to us that what we had intended to do was to help him get someplace. And what we had ended up doing actually was terrifying him to the point that he couldn't get there. that there was a barrier that was built so sturdily by the place that he was from, his family, his lack of money, that by the time somebody told him the news that he had been waiting to hear all his life, he just couldn't accept it anymore.
Yeah,
and those other things turned out to be Trump.
So you did the opposite of what you're trying to do.
Not for the first time. But
yeah, I know.
Yeah,
You've been there.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Rick, you're really nailing a taboo that we don't talk about much in America. We can talk about all sorts of things on national TV, sexual and otherwise. We don't really talk about class because we're not supposed to have these real class divisions. But man, they're there. I think there's some rich territory there just aesthetically that they're there. But, I have a friend, it has nothing to do with art, but it has to do with class. And briefly, one of the most intelligent, artistic, creative, sensitive, well-read souls I know. His father was a middle school janitor, 8th grade educated. His mother didn't go past the 6th grade. They were also first-generation Italian from the peasant class. And I just, over the years, I've seen him sabotage and sabotage and sabotage his step deeper into his own art and his own process. And to me, and I may be wrong, everyone, but my conclusion about my dear friend is he is betraying his family to grow. To fly into his soul, he has to turn his back on his parents and his kin. And that's something I'm free of. I didn't have that difficulty given the father I have and that influence, even though we didn't live together. But another thing I'm thinking about here, I want to throw into the mix to talk about maybe, is this whole notion that even the pursuit of trying, I'll talk about art for a second. I mean, I would never call myself an artist. I think that's for someone else to say. I hope they say it. Boy, that guy Andre, he's an artist. But I can't say it. Right. I can tell you that I've been trying to create it for 30 friggin' years. I want what comes out. I want it to go inside the reader and do something. There's a wonderful line from Tolstoy. Art, it's very simple and it's very elegant. Art is transferring feeling from one heart to another.
Beautiful.
Well, that's a lot of hard work, man. That's hard work. That's hard work to get that done.
And instead of transforming yourself, you want to transform the reader. You want them to be illuminated by the human condition that you have illuminated.
Yeah, whether it's about a nun or living under a bridge or whatever we're writing about.
Right.
But here's my question for you all, is it seems to me, too, that the mere, not the mere, because it's nothing mere about it, but the daily leap into yourself with words or paints or whatever the artistic form is, here we're talking about writing, that can be transformative whether you ever achieve art or not. Back to teaching. I see some students whose lives have been changed simply by trying to create truth and beauty on the page.
Right.
Even though their craft is nowhere near that yet. They've got years to go, so what? But just by being on the path, there's something transformative about the trying. And I think the young man you're talking about, it seems to me that maybe there was, without knowing him at all, and at least 2 or 3 fears going on. One, I would suggest he has to turn his back on his entire family. Easier said than done. 2, not everyone is prepared to dive into what you have to dive into to write every day for years, which is yourself. Yeah. And it's a shitstorm. I'm sorry, did I? As my daughter would say, did I just say that out loud? Right? Yeah. So, but what do you think? I mean, there's my question. And do you think it's transformative potentially just to try to make art, whether we make it or not?
Yes. I totally agree with that. It doesn't, I mean, I talk to all of our nieces and nephews, and the speech is always about follow your bliss. Find what you love to do, then find a way to get paid for it. That's a transformative thing. That's like that is exactly what you're saying.
Well, and also, exactly, so this young man possibly, maybe one of the fears there, if you do decide to step into your authentic road, and Joseph Campbell talked about this beautifully with the whole bliss thing years ago, the stakes are much higher. So if you're not doing what you really want to do and you fail at that, well, that's a bad day, but at least you didn't want to be a car salesman anyway. Right. But if everything is hinging upon you writing a great novel and you fail at that, it's a harder fall. It's a harder fall.
Yeah, and you know, we always try to be practical, and there are people out there who are, I've always had to defend, because I did an MFA in fiction writing at the
After the PhD.
After the PhD, actually. That's why it took me so long. But there are always people out there who want to say to you, you know, how can you justify that? How can you justify, given we all know what the numbers are of writers who go to writing programs, and who out of those writing programs, who will still be working a decade after that, who will still be writing. And it turns out that the numbers are really small. I know in my graduate writing program, never mind all the undergraduate courses that I took. In the graduate writing program, if you had, say, 15 people in a workshop, you might go a couple of workshops or 3. You might, in order to get one real writer to come out of that, maybe 1 in 45. And then so people would say, well, what about the other 44? You know, haven't you failed them? If the odds are that bad that they're going to be able to learn their craft well enough to be able to make a living at it, then this is bordering dangerously on fraud, is it not? But it goes back to what you were saying, Andre, I think, is that it's not that the other 44 got nothing, it's just that they didn't become professional writers. Right? They got something out of it, and in fact may even have, despite the fact that they didn't become professional artists as such, just being on the road may have transformed, you know, going back to empathy and some of the other things that we've talked about, you might have just made, you know, a better husband.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe.
Right. Certainly better readers.
Wouldn't be necessarily a bad thing to do. Right. You might. So yeah, it's to look at it in terms of success, of art transforming life. Without redefining it, you're going to think of transforming into money, into fame, into celebrity, into any of those things, and those things can, upon occasion, happen, but they shouldn't be the terms in which we proceed on the discussion.
Well, when you have young people today, I mean, we live in a celebrity culture. You must, I mean, Chris and I used to go and talk to our son's 6th grade. We were like Debbie and Don Downer talking about, you know, yeah, acting, but it's not the red carpet. It's really years of starving, and you've really got to want it, and blah, blah, blah. And
ramen noodles.
and no one wanted to hear that, you know, because we do live in a celebrity culture, and it's all about that. And you're not talking about that when you're talking about being transformed by art. You're talking about something much deeper and much more life-changing. You know, so.
Let me ask you one more question then, and it's going to be coming time here where we'll want to well, we won't turn the mics off, but we'll turn those mics on and see if we can get some of you to ask questions. Not long ago, I had the opportunity to do a, Robert Benton was given an honorary award by the Screen Writers, Actors Guild. Anyway, which I had the opportunity to MC, and I had a chance at the end of the evening to sit down and talk with him for a while. And the question that I asked him was, you became a film director. But he had said to me once earlier that at some point in his life, it just occurred to him that he wanted to make things. And he was, as a child, he was dyslexic, and when his father took him to the first movie he ever went to in a small Texas town, it just blew the doors open for him, because here was a way that he could tell stories, which he wanted to do. He knew himself well enough to know that he was a storyteller. And he wanted to tell stories, but words and letters had a way of dancing on the page in front of him and rearranging themselves. And as a kid, that was horrible for him because he knew that wasn't happening to other people. So when he saw his first movie and saw a narrative that could be told in images, it absolutely changed his life. And strangely enough, ironically in a way, it allowed him later in life to return to words without the terror and without the misgiving, because he knew that even if he was going to be a very visual, you have to be very visual if you're going to be a director, he was going to need to make use of words. And he had a great ear, and he just got used to it. He just got used to putting those words on the page, but always in the service of image. So the question that I asked Benton that night was, if it hadn't been movies, then what? You know, because is there some deeper urge that we have? We've come to acting, we've come to writing, but is there something deeper than all of that? And if it hadn't been one of those, would we have found something else? And I remember Benton said to me that night, "What do you mean, like carving decoys?" but then he, having had his joke, he explained a lot of what I just explained to you about the way he had come to movies. But he too felt that but maybe there was something else. Maybe there was something under this thing. And so I would just ask each of you, if it hadn't been this, is there any part of your, you don't want to call yourself an artist, but is there any part of your artistic life that says, you know, if I could do it all over again, I'd do this? And why would that be? What would there be in another art form that, and the answer to this is no, it could be no. So, I mean, if I've asked the wrong question, just say no.
No, it's a great question. Yeah. I just want to be Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Nah. No, I've actually thought a lot about singing and songwriting, and I love to sing, and I sang to our kids when they were little, and I really gravitate towards literary songwriters like Springsteen, Lucinda Williams, Tom Waits is probably my favorite American songwriter, and I have to quote a Tom Waits line because it goes back to this whole notion of controlling and stepping into the mysteries and the questions that art does. Tom Waits has a great line from Heart Attack and Vine, one of his songs. "There is no devil, there's just God when he's drunk." And I love that. I quoted him in Ohio. I thought I was going to get lynched, you know. Yeah, singer-songwriter for me, brother.
Yeah. I had fantasies about that too, singing. So I realized that even though I can speak...
Oh, let's do a band.
I can speak very high-toned about illuminating human truth through art and blah, blah, blah. But I was thinking of that while you were talking. I was thinking, wow, this all just started from being a show-off, though. I mean, really, it did. It really did. It was from being a show-off. And, I mean, my friend Gail Gallo, who was 4, and I made her sing Stay Put, Lipstick Stays Put. I, like, directed her. And, I mean, they can attest to that. It was showing up.
How about you, sir?
Well, that's interesting because I was a show-off as well. How about, Andre, were you?
Hello.
Marianne.
No. So we have drilled down really deep here. We've gone from art to being a show-off here as the fundamental human urge.
But hold on now, Rick. What about you?
Well, I did in graduate school, all those years in graduate school, doing my MA, PhD, and then MFA. I was a singer and guitarist in a local bar for like 7 or 8 of those years. So,
are you kidding me?
No.
This is just a way for us to bring out the guitars. Keith, come on.
Keith, come on. He's right there.
Can I just say one serious thing? I know we want to hear from these people, but I have this theory. You know, a lot of us are on antidepressants. I understand. I'm not, but I know. I mean, a lot of us American adults are popping these anti-anxiety and depression pills, and I'm not judging anyone who does, and all my dear friends seem to. But I'll tell you why I don't think I need to, and I'm not saying I'm above pathology by any stretch, but I think that people need to make things, and I think we need to use our bodies. And I have a hunch. As a matter of fact, studies have actually shown this. Yeah. This one group of all depressed adults, one group was given, a pretty effective antidepressant, and then one group was given finger paints, poetry to write. They went on a running program. guess who got better faster? Yeah. People who are painting, writing, and running. And I do think that these bodies are meant to be used in some sort of a vigorous way on a daily basis. And I think we're supposed to make things, you know. My favorite day on the planet is days I get to have a lot, which is I write all morning, I go to the gym, and then I do some kind of, you know, I was building some shelves in my house. I get to work with wood all day. Then I cook. And looking back, I really, you know, hang out with my kids and my wife, and I realize that my favorite days are when I'm making things all day long. And making love is good, too. You can throw that in.
So before we go to the audience, then, just to summarize.
It's kind of frightening.
Show off. Learn drywall. Learn to hang drywall.
Make love.
Make love. Yeah. Yeah. Good phraseology there. And cook. And there you have it.
You're right. Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Ellen, I'm from Cape Cod, and this is great. This is truly great.
Hey, Ellen.
And I'll tell you why. Hi. I've been in healthcare reform for a very long time, and now I've been doing a TV show, a public access TV show, everyone comes on, and it was very creative for me. However, I wrote my memoir last year called Ellen in Medical Land, True Stories of How I Fell Down Medicine's Black Hole and Still Lived After All, about my experiences at Harvard Teaching Hospital. Now I'm writing a one-woman show based on that book, and I'll perform it.
Cool.
And it is. It's fantastic. And what is cool about it, I think it gives you such a feeling of accomplishment and power and to express yourself. I think most people want to do this. And what I have found also, because the memoir does talk about this Harvard Teaching Hospital, I'm not accepting horrible situations. And many people do. Many people do. They say, that's just business as usual. And so when you can take an experience or write a fiction about whatever happened, it gives you such a wonderful, powerful feeling. And it has made me feel more alive. And I'm sure what you guys do makes you feel so alive. No matter if people buy it, you want to make money, obviously, but it's and I recommend it to anybody because it is so important. It makes you feel wonderful. And just to let you know, Ellen in Medical Land is on Kindle. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go back and forth here between the microphones.
Hi, my name is Kathy, and I live in Central Mass. I'm very interested in transformative learning and in teaching, and I train teachers as part of my living. And I wanted to ask you, who was the most transformative teacher you ever had? And I'm thinking in terms of teachers you've had who did not teach you how to write. And I'd like to know, what was it about them that helped you become the writer you are right now?
Well, it sounds so, I don't know. It was a boxing coach. I was 16. His name was Paul Harriman. I was a little guy trying to be a tough guy in a scary neighborhood. And because I had no men, very few men in my life, my dad, he did not abandon my family, as some reviewers of my memoir say. I saw him once a week, though. It was a 70s divorce. I saw him 2 hours on a Sunday. That was it. All the uncles, all the cousins, all the grandparents lived 2,000 miles away in Louisiana. We moved a lot. There were very few men in my life. This guy looked at me, taught me how to throw a few punches, and then when I punched the bag, well, first he says, "You are a lot stronger than you look." But then, and this is my answer to you about why he was transformative, I went on to have really good teachers in college, and I can name 12 of them, but he's the first that comes to my mind because I think he's deepest in my psyche because he was the first man or teacher figure who I felt looked at me, saw me, and then responded to what he saw. And so to me, I try to bring that to my teaching. I try to see who's in my room. I try to learn their names the first day, even in a class of 50 kids, and I try to see them every time they come in. And it's, no, I'm not saying I do it, pull it off every day, but that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay, there were no good teachers all through high school.
But one sitting here today.
But my son was my most transformative teacher. My son was nonverbal, quadriplegic, and in the 99th percentile for learning. So to watch him, the patience that he needed to communicate with us, to watch him with his own teachers who were incredible, watching him with his teachers. His teacher, Mrs. Joan Champa, was one of them. To watch her, her wonder at her own learning, and then transposing that to my son, who caught it like a flu, and it went back and forth between the two of them. That transformed me to watch them, because my book is about my son. He was my #1 teacher in every aspect.
Before you can make a writer, you have to make a reader. And my mother had, I have a book coming out this fall. It's a memoir, but it's really much more about my mother's life than it is about mine and the community, the town where I grew up. My mother used to work at General Electric Corporation in Schenectady, which was about an hour, maybe 50 minutes from where the family lived in Gloversville. And as a result of that, it was often my grandfather or my grandmother who would get me to school in the morning. My mother was up and out just about the time I was getting up. I would say goodbye to her. She had an hour's trip to Schenectady and then an hour's trip on the way home, which meant that I usually ate dinner with my grandparents before she got home. When she got home, at the end of the day, she had, without benefit of a dishwasher or a laundry facilities, you know, she had to get me ready for school the next day, give me money for whatever I might need, iron my shirt, whatever her motherly duties were, she had to do. And then that would bring her until around 9 o'clock. And at 9 o'clock, after you've put in 8 hours at work and 2 hours on the road for a total of 10, and then you have to cook your own dinner and make sure that this little kid that's there asking you for things all the time, make sure that he's straightened around for the next day. Think of it as 9:30 or 10 o'clock, and just the easiest thing in the world for her to do would have been to sit down in front of the television and turn that sucker on and watch it. But every night she read. The books that she read were books that I outgrew as a young man who had the benefits of studying literature. But what she taught me, without ever saying a word, is that reading is something that you do not out of a sense of obligation, but out of, this is what you do to reward yourself for a good day. And that's the way, and no teacher was ever able to beat that out of me. And some tried. Some tried. But I don't think, and I had a lot of good teachers, especially as I went off to the university, and I too studied with nuns in high school, but went off to the university, had several good teachers, but none of them could have ever done anything with me if I hadn't learned from my mother that a good book is how you is one of the ways that you reward yourself. You got to become a reader before you're going to become a writer. Nice question, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Diane. I'm a librarian, and I want to thank you and many other authors for giving me great things to read and great things to recommend to my patrons.
First, thank you for being a librarian.
Thanks. Sometimes I can't believe I get paid to do it, but last year, Andre, you came to my library when I was at the Bacon Free Library in Natick.
That was great.
And you were the first author that I've seen that I felt that you had to write. You didn't try to create characters that would sell or plots that were the recent rage. You were the first one that I ever met that you felt like you really had to write no matter what. And I was wondering if that's as rare as I think it is.
You know, there's a great line from the writer Janet Burway. She said, you know, writing isn't hard. Not writing is hard. But that's only true if you're a writer. And when I get asked by a young person, you know, how do I know if I'm a writer? I say, well, can you go 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 days without writing and feel okay? Yeah? Well, you're probably not a writer. Big deal. If you can't, if you start to feel homicidal and like you left your soul 3 steps behind you, you probably should write. And you know, whether Oprah ever notices or not, I tell people you're a writer if you get in those daily sessions. That's what it is. And there's a great line from the writer Thomas Williams, who's getting a resurgence. If you have not read his novel, The Hair of Harold Rue, it won the National Book Award in '75. It's reissued by Bloomsbury this year. He's got a great line. He was asked, "Why do you write, Mr. Williams?" He said, "Oh, that's easy. I write so I don't die before I'm dead."
That's a great line.
Yeah.
Can I use that?
Yeah, steal it.
I totally agree. I mean, I felt like I had to write, you know, all the essays I wrote, it wasn't that way with the screenplays. Those were for fun and
Money.
money. Yeah, they sold, but they weren't produced. They all had women leads. Sorry, no explosions. Sorry. But I did feel I had to write about my son beginning, and it came out of an essay that I wrote 3 months after he died, and it was something I had to write. It was almost as if it didn't expiate the pain, but it illuminated it in some way. So yeah.
I've just discovered this. I'm 62. I've been doing this for a long time. I've discovered that as unhappy as I am writing sometimes, especially on bad days when it doesn't turn out well, I'm much unhappier when I don't. So I don't know if that's the same thing as saying I have to write. I'm just trying to avoid unhappiness, I think, in that, or a particular kind of unhappiness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir?
I'm a writer and a writing teacher, and I often do writing teaching in a much different world than you know, MA programs, more like Cambridge Center for Adult Ed, where a lot of people are taking these classes in order to force themselves to write. They have often considered themselves writers. Maybe even they define themselves as a writer when they were 18, and yet they've spent very little time writing. And I often say that it's the least sensual of the art forms. It uses the English language. It isn't fun like strumming a guitar might be, or maybe even painting is more sensual. And I'm wondering, I mean, I've spent times myself so-called blocked. I'm wondering, I guess, why, I mean, my thought of why people who don't write at all consider themselves writers is that the easiest way to sort of secretly feel that you're an incredibly creative person. But there's a desire that doesn't come out in a regular basis. And sometimes in these classes, some of these people are phenomenal. And they say, I haven't written in 8 years, and this is great that I got back to it for 8 weeks. So there's a dichotomy there that I find pretty interesting.
Well, can I speak to that? What's your first name?
Daniel.
Hey, Daniel. I find that whole situation you described very poignant, actually, because I do believe that we're creative people, all of us. I haven't met anyone yet who's not. I haven't met anyone yet who doesn't have an imagination. But we live in a culture that puts us in cubicles in front of screens to make money to buy things we don't need, and we wonder why we're popping pills to feel happier. I think one reason people feel possibly that they've been writers their whole lives but they haven't written is they might be right, but also, and they're practicing a form of self-destruction that we can all do when we eat too much and don't exercise and all the other things we do that aren't good for themselves. I think the fact that we use human language every day is deceiving. We use it every day. And now more than ever, because we are all on these gadgets with emails and texting, and now people are actually using language more than they probably ever would before in written form. But most of us don't go around every day with a paintbrush and paints in our hands. We don't go around, you know, doing pirouettes. You know, we don't. So I think there's this feeling that, okay, I use these tools of the writer every day. So it's work emails, but I'm still using it. I don't find that doesn't, I get ticked off at writers who get ticked off at people like that. I think, well, look, there's an impulse in them, and I think, Daniel, I see in you a good teacher who sees it too, that I have never seen a sincere desire to write up against an absolute lack of ability to do so. I've seen the opposite. Most people who feel compelled to write, whether they've done it or not, It's because there's something in them that has not been given birth to. It's nascent, it's dormant, it needs some watering.
Or they have James Joyce over here sneering at them and Colette making a face.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's
Yeah,
that.
you can, reading's important, but you don't want to read too many of the greats too soon.
And it's a lonely business too, I think. I think writing is lonely, and some people are afraid to be alone that much. And, you know, I was thinking of that the other day, the difference, because I do both, of when you're acting and you're on a set and you're seeing the same people every day and it's really fun and everybody's, you know, joking with one another, and it's so different to write and to be alone and to be quiet. Some people are afraid of that. I don't blame them, you know.
But to your other point, writing is, and well, I mean, here we are in the JFK Library, which houses the great Hemingway collection. And Hemingway is not only one of the great writers, but he was also one of the great self-mythologizers of the romantic notion of the writer. So part of what your students, I mean, it's an easy lie to get away with. What do you do? I'm a writer. Who's going to call you on that necessarily? But it trails a certain romantic aura to it too.
Right.
So I think that I think you're seeing at least a half a dozen or maybe a dozen or 2 dozen things in your particular teaching there.
But I do think there's something very poignant behind this whole thing. I want to hear from these people too, I know, but this whole notion, Emerson, only connect. And I think about this revolutionary family therapist named Virginia Satir, who died a few years ago, and she's got this line that, this is her definition of intimacy. Intimacy is my own ability to share with you my truth and your ability to reciprocate.
Right.
Isn't that beautiful?
Makes sense.
Intimacy is my own ability to share with you my truth and your ability to reciprocate. I bring this up in writing classes because I think so much of the impulse to tell stories, to write stories, to capture people on the page is this desire to be intimate with other human beings before you're dead. I always look at this impulse to go into story with those stakes. And so I always take very seriously when someone says I'm a writer, I believe them. And I don't point out the fact that they haven't written anything in 68 years. I said, well, you're not dead yet. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Nate, and I just want to, again, thank you for being here. I've really enjoyed this, despite the fact that I've had to pee nearly the entire time.
Speaking of sharing your truth, brother.
I thought I'd just let it all out, but not literally. Anyway.
And he's under 50.
Anyway, I wanted to just say I really, the story of the guy from Carbondale, the Carbondale area, it's an area I grew up in, roundabouts, and that resonated with me. I do think that there are a lot of people in this country, a lot of uneducated folks, undereducated folks who carry around a lot of profound thoughts and a lot of profound impulses, who are told that nobody cares, nobody wants to hear about that crap, just get over it and just move on. And they become silenced in their lives. And that's not only profoundly sad to me, it's been, in my life, also profoundly rage-inducing that this all sort of just dies, this just goes to nothing. And finally, when I got to college in my late 20s, early 30s, after, doing a lot of other things, good and bad, discovering a book like, I remember Winesburg, Ohio, where suddenly you have all these people doing these sometimes horrible things, and they're just sort of there, and you get this understanding, this connection, and to find that over and over again in literature was amazing for me and really profound. And I also found that in Bridge of Sighs, your novel, which I thought was tremendous, with this same sort of insight into people who you might pass by in the street and think, this person hasn't had an original thought in, decades maybe. But really they do. You just don't stop to see it, and you don't stop to think about it. And I wanted, there's such a idea in that book about art. One of the characters is an artist. And this connection between the working class and the artist, between the sort of high art of Venice, which is, is there anything in the Western world higher, and, essentially a convenience store, a family grocery store in a small town. When you were kind of threading those things together, did you ever think, oh my God, this is not gonna, these two, it's polar opposites, nobody's gonna believe this. Or were you just sort
every
of
minute of every day and every page?
Per usual.
How in the world am I going to string these two different settings and everything together? Yeah, it wasn't immediately clear to me at all.
So it just sort of, you unraveled it as you did it, kind of thing.
I unraveled it. It unraveled me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well done.
But what's interesting, Nate, too, is that character who becomes the artist in Venice actually is from the blue-collar town that his best friend stayed in. And I think that's one of the central thematic territories of the book. Can I quote Hemingway while we're in the space? For all I know, the letter might even be here. In a letter to his editor, Maxwell Perkins at Scribner's, he said, "Max, the writer's job is not to judge, but to seek to understand." And I think that's what I'm hearing. It's also rage-inducing for me, too. I'm not saying for a second that I don't think Hemingway was saying either that the creative writer is a less judgmental person. He could be judgmental, we all know. I think what he was saying, though, is at the desk, you better suspend those lower human qualities and some in the higher ones, like patience, lack of judgment, curiosity. Do not assume. Do not reduce people. Be curious about them.
And the thing you realize, I think, as you get older, is that people who are motivated by love and by kindness and compassion can end up doing horrible things to each other, even with those motivations.
Yeah.
How do you explain that? That, as a child, you don't think that can happen. You think if people love you, they're going to do right by you. And you realize sometimes the hard way that that's not true. And how do you put those facts together without yourself allowing yourself to sort of descend into darkness and just be a terrible person?
There is no devil, there's just God when he's drunk.
Thank you.
Tom,
I'm going to go have a drink.
Okay.
Yeah, go pee.
Please, for all of us. Young man.
Hi, I'm Cameron from Framingham, Massachusetts.
Hey, Cameron.
I want to know if you ever feel that your writing isn't good enough.
Oh, brother. Let's go get a cup of coffee, Cameron. Go ahead. I mean, yes.
Yes, and often it isn't. But that kind of that's just self-doubt, and you would feel that if you were a baseball player, or if almost anything that you care about deeply enough to not want to fail at is going to cause that little voice in the back of your head, the little voice that we all have in the back of our heads telling us we're not good enough. Sure, every day. But you just keep doing it. Good question.
Really good.
Cameron, you right?
Yeah.
I don't think it ever goes away, does it?
No.
I think, in fact, the more you do this, the more the doubts sink in.
The only thing that goes away as you get a little bit more secure is knowing when you're not up to your own standards of what's good. You know what I mean? You look at it and you say, this isn't my voice. I'm writing in some highfalutin voice that isn't mine. And that's when you need to really, that's when you're right. You're not doing your best.
And also, you have the experience of knowing that just because you've hated what you've worked on in the past doesn't mean you can't make it better if you work. Writing is all in the revision. It's all in the rewriting, thank God.
And someday somebody is going to, if they haven't already, someday somebody's going to look at you, as André was saying earlier, really look at you and say, you're good at this. And so for all the days that the little voice in the back of your head is saying you're not good enough, someday somebody who knows is going to say you are good enough. And you'll hear that voice too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eric, and I'm a writeaholic. Apropos of that, there's a great quote by Thomas Mann. He says, a writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for others.
That's good.
I wanted to follow up on your early comments about empathy. Mr. Russo, you were sort of implying that when you were a PhD student, it didn't reach you in some way, but after you started writing fiction, this empathy came out, and you seem to be implying that it affected your daily behavior or behavior at some points in life, and I was wondering if you could all maybe expound on that, and what does this empathy mean? What does it result in? Does it result in something tangible in the world, and so on?
Yeah, I don't want to. I mean, some of it's kind of personal, and I don't want to go into an awful lot of detail. But I would say that I mean, just as I don't want to tell you things that I have done in my life that I'm not proud of, I also don't want to tell you things in my life necessarily that I am proud of if they're personal. But I think that being a writer, and I started writing seriously before my wife and I got married. But I think at the time that I started writing, I became a better boyfriend, and I later, as a result of writing these books, became a better husband. I know I have become a better father because, as we're saying, it's empathy. It's the ability to imagine what someone is feeling when they're not telling you what they're feeling, which is what, you know, marriage and parenthood and all those really important things are all about. And so for me, just in a practitioner's way, forcing myself on a daily basis to imagine what fictional characters were feeling, what they feared, what gave them joy, made me, I think, at least if my wife were here, we could get a second opinion. I think it just made me better in roles that have nothing to do with my professional role as a writer. Did that answer your question?
And speaking from an acting perspective, which dovetails with the writing, there is no way that you can ever play a character that you have contempt for, even if it's Ava Brown. You know what I mean? You have to find the connection, the human truth, to play that character well. So that's a broadening of empathy, too. Yeah.
You know, Faulkner was asked late in his life, what's the main thing the writer needs in order to create art, sir? And he said, it ain't talent. He said, I used to think it was talent, and I don't anymore. He said, it's curiosity. And his exact phrase was, insight, to wonder, to mull and to muse why it is that man does what he does. And if you have that, then talent makes no difference whether you have it or not. Flannery O'Connor said, there is a certain grain of stupidity the writer can hardly do without. Your mother was blessing you. She said, and that is the quality of having to stare. The truth is, I think I was always a curious kid in more ways than one, but I was always interested in people. I got it beaten out of me. I really did. I got to be very defensive and psychologically and otherwise. And that daily act of trying to become other people on the page just reopened what I think all kids are born with, which is, Mommy, why does that man have one leg? Yeah. Mommy, why is Uncle Joe always in the corner? Yeah. Mommy, you know, these questions that kids always ask, they're like the voice of God to me. And I think that's how it's been tangible for me, is I'm to a point of interrogating people too much. So what do you do? What's your father do? My wife kicks me under the table many times.
Well, thank you for a great discussion.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Leone, my question to you, you alluded to the lack of support that you felt from your family and community when you were growing up in terms of your desire to pursue the arts. How has that changed for you?
Oh, no, they were great. I mean, after my mother, believe me, but my mother was going all around the lake. You watch The Sopranos? I mean, no, they were very into it after that. It was just you know, coming up, the idea. I mean, I get it. I really get it. Here's this woman who, you know, hardscrabble, came over to escape an arranged marriage and fascism and everything else, and now her daughter tells her, I'm going to New York, I'm going to be an actor. You know, I'm going to college. It was like this creature disappearing into a strange world. She didn't even like it that I read books. She thought it was making me crazy, which is right. But, you know, it was just too alien. It was too alien. And she just wanted me to, you know, marry a guy from the neighborhood and leave them alone. But then they got used to it. And you know what? They were a great inspiration, all of them, for acting and for writing. My mother especially, who was the most colorful person. So I'm grateful to have come up where I came up, big time.
I would add to that too. Seen from a parent's point of view, I think it's one of the sadder things about. It's the part of the American dream that we don't talk about very much. We talk about, you know, becoming educated, if that's part of it, working hard, getting money, moving up in class, if that's part of what's happening to you. But in doing that, you're leaving. You're leaving something, you're leaving someone, you're leaving some place. And from a parent's point of view, and I used to talk to parents all the time when I was teaching in these large state universities. And they would come in, and sometimes they were belligerent, like I would say before. No son of mine is going to be an English major. He's going to do something practical. He's going to have a job at the end of this. I'm not putting down my hard-earned money so that you can teach him Whitman, right? So, with all of that, but behind that too was a simple fear, which is, don't take my son. Right. And for a parent who's putting out that kind of money, what they'd like at the end of the day is their son back, recognizable, with the same values that were instilled, and they're smart enough to know that if the kid goes to the university and learns to think, which is what we would hope, they're going to come home changed. They cannot help but that. They cannot help it. But depending on your circumstance, that's a real fear from a parental point of view, is give me my son back. Please don't take him.
Yep, that's really true. Yeah, because I turned into an insufferable snob once I got, I mean, it's true. I mean, it was only until later that I actually outgrew that, and I totally see it happening. I mean, you're going to turn on them and be like, oh, please, what do you know? I get it. So that's a really good point. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Liv, and I'm 17, so I'm still going through that lovely period of note passing in high school. And I haven't learned drywall yet, but I am a show-off, so I've got this all covered. Out of a certain degree of experience, I have learned the transformative power through entirely crappy writing, so bad, but it did really help me get through a period of time, as well as learn some empathy. But my question is, diving into yourself and having that transformative power, and really learning empathy can be really overwhelming when you can look at a room full of people and see a lot more than they want you to see, really. And that can be really hard when every decision is not just affected by your own self, but by everybody. So my question is, how did you, every day, not just the first time, but every day, how do you sit down and really make yourself do this, which in some cases, even if you need to, it can be very, very hard to really, it's incredibly overwhelming and intimidating in a lot of cases.
But you sound like you're talking about the emotional reaction to this that you're experiencing, not the craft part of it. It sounds like you're talking about the psychic hangover you get.
Yes, yeah, really.
Right?
I've kind of, the writing, the craft of it is, I think, I agree, in some cases it is beside the point. If you want to write, no matter what kind of writing you write, it's still important whether you get published or not.
But Liz, I'm sorry, go ahead.
She's talking too about the tightrope, leaving yourself open enough to be able to see all that truth and transform it, but not to fall off the tightrope into, right?
Yeah.
So to stay sensitive, but not too vulnerable.
Right.
So how do you do that?
Right.
But it also sounds like, are you also talking about what if you're the truth teller in the family?
Well, my parents aren't always appreciative of the way I talk, but my mother's sitting over there, so she can tell you that. But more of, since it is very emotional and overwhelming, emotional hangover, how do you really confront that, and how do you really dive into that and then also pull yourself out and have to live in, the real world where people expect you to have to deal with real things, not just talk about, psychology and ideas. So how do you make yourself really dive into the emotional part?
Well, can I jump in?
Yeah.
I'm so glad you asked. First of all, I'm so impressed with your poise at 17. My God, I'd be drunk underneath the bridge at your age, hiding from the cops.
My parents are both nerds, so I kind of grew up with the writing art thing.
You're asking a profoundly important question, it seems to me, because I think one of the mistakes that people go, and Dan, the gentleman talking about teaching at the Hebrew Continuing Ed School for Adults, that kind of thing, I think one of the misconceptions about the creative life, whether it's writing or acting or dance, whatever, is that it's therapy. It's not therapy. In fact, it can be the opposite. It can stick your face into the flame and leave you wounded. And one of the things that I think you're talking about, and I would just throw out for you to think about, Liz, and all of us maybe, is don't put the pressure on your writing to make you feel good, or your whatever your art is. If you're writing on, let me tell you, this is, Liz, how I know I'm writing honestly. When the rest of the day and into the night, I feel kind of vaguely nasty, inappropriate, disloyal, mediocre, stupid, and wrong. Right? And if I walk around feeling like that, I think, oh, I might be going fairly deeply but if I'm walking around feeling kind of sexy and good looking and attractive and successful, didn't go deep enough at all. But what I've learned to do is and I think you're talking about, the working, how do you make this a working life? Do something else to feel good. I like to run and work out and, cook and build things. But I do other things to feel good. And if I don't, I'm putting too much on the work. And I'm asking the work to do something it's not supposed to do. It's not therapy. It's the opposite sometimes.
My mom suggested writing before I went to bed, and I said that wasn't a good idea because I have nightmares.
Oh, yeah.
And she was like, no, it'll be relaxing. I'm like, no, really, really, it's
no,
okay.
Beer is relaxing. I was kidding, Ma.
Good. I'll keep that in mind.
No, I was kidding.
Chamomile tea. That's what he meant to say, chamomile tea.
Yeah, I meant tea.
I would also say, just to add to that, if you're associating writing with angst, keep in mind too that the world is also a funny place, and if you're associating writing with angst and with pain, one of the things that happens, especially when you're young, is that most of the literature that's taught in high school in particular, but also in college, can be fairly weighty stuff. And I think great comic writing is often not taught, and so you come to great comic writing a little bit later. And I think that my
it comes out of pain that you have when you're 17.
Yeah,
tell her the truth.
But yeah, but I think too that just don't think of the world as a tragic place when you go to write. Think of it also sometimes as a funny place, and that will leaven your experience of writing as painful.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks. It was incredibly inspiring listening to you all talk. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicholas from Cambridge, and I had a question about the writing process. Do you ever find yourself, when you're going through the events in your day, to be so illuminated that you have to stop what you're doing, almost suffering from a physiological reaction, an inherent need to write? Do you ever experience that at all?
I never feel like writing ever. I'm kidding. No, I feel like writing right now because we're talking about it, but I can guarantee you tomorrow I'll be wanting to, in the morning when I write, I'll be wanting to watch that CNN. It's important to stay informed, right? Anything but then the writing creates more writing. You're really describing a beautiful thing, which is inspiration, which comes from the Greek inspiros, which means breath of the gods. However, sadly, those gym coaches or those gym teachers growing up were 100% right. It's 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. So I would write all that down. I'd have a little notebook. I'd write down all these things that are just filling you with this breath of the gods, and then see what happens when you sit down in front of that blank screen or that blank piece of paper, and then see how quickly the breath stops. And it's just you. But I think that's good because I frankly find inspiration to be overwhelming when it's too much. I'd go for a long, fast walk if I were you too, if it's coming too hard and fast.
And then go on the respirator and write it.
Yeah, right.
I used to have, it made me think of something funny actually when I was working in Carbondale, Illinois, when I was teaching there and writing there. I used to always work in the local Denny's. And I had my own booth there, and I would go in at times when nobody else was around so that I wasn't keeping the booth away from somebody who might actually want to order food there and keep the restaurant in business. But and this was over a period of about 4 years. I was probably in Denny's at least either in the morning or the afternoon, and sometimes both, for you know, a couple of hours in the morning, sometimes a couple of hours in the afternoon. And when we left that job, when I left that job to come east where I was teaching at Colby College, one of the most difficult things, one of the most difficult problems that I had was along the way as we were driving, every time we'd pass a Denny's, I'd get an idea. And
it's so Pavlovian.
And when we got to Maine, there were no Denny's. but I'm telling you, it's funny, but it's absolutely true. There are certain things that become part of our process. That's one of the reasons we have a process. Is you get into certain rituals. My ritual might not be your ritual, but a ritual is something that allows inspiration to visit. And so if you're having some sort of visceral reaction to needing to write or something like that, it may just be something, you know, like passing Denny's. I don't know.
But he needs a ritual.
We're coming.
He needs a ritual.
Yes, we do. Yeah, the ritual part of it is I think for me at least has always been very important. We have time for we're supposed to stop here kind of now. So maybe
hear from these ladies here.
Yeah. We have two more people for the microphone now. So we'll.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
We'll get room for two questions, and we'll try to do a little bit quicker than we've been.
Hello, my name is Sister John Julie. Oh, have I been waiting all
And you weren't going to let her talk.
I said there are probably nice ones out there.
I think there's something.
Yes, this was quite informative. Now, Marianne, I want to go back to the nuns who are obsessed by martyrdom. Well, first of all, I belong to a teaching congregation, and the vast majority of us come out of communities that were formed to educate girls.
Bold girls?
Very bold girls.
I was a bold girl.
Bold girl, yeah. And one of the founding principles was that if you educate a boy, you educate a boy. But if you educate a girl, you educate a family. Now, I think the whole some of the themes this afternoon about things that are transformative in terms of the art. When we used to teach religion, we said that a martyr was somebody who it would cost you your life to do what you wanted to do and to believe what you wanted to believe. And that certainly has been the story for a whole lot of women who became martyrs for a whole bunch of causes and reasons and family and all the rest. But I'm wondering about the transformative elements of women's experience when they try to write about the human experience that somehow lacks credibility with a large part of the public because we don't publish as many women. We don't have as many women writing, accepting the scripts like yours for movies and television and all the rest. So I'm trying to figure out, what is it about our transformative experience and trying to work in the arts that make it so necessary for us to have to be martyrs, for God's sake, to do the work?
Well, I mean, it's a boys' club. It's a boys' club in film. It's a boys' club in the publishing world.
And in the church.
I mean, please. I mean...
Next question, please.
Yeah. 70% of the novelists, writers reviewed in the New York Times are men. Mm-hmm. You know, as to 30% women. Women write as many books. Women buy more books. You know, in the Oscars, it took them 80 years to give a woman director an award, and 81%, there were 81 male nominees and 19 female nominees. So, I mean, it's very off-kilter. And I think it's going backwards, actually. I mean, you've got, you know, I mean, now we're discussing birth control. Not with you, of course. But, I mean, it's going backwards, you know? I mean...
All right. Oh, but we are. Thank you, Marianne.
Bless you.
I don't think I can follow that, but I'll try. I had a small question for Marianne, but I'm going, Mrs. Cooper, sorry.
No, Marianne is great.
But I wanted to, I heard André Dubus just say something I want to ask a question about, but mainly I got up here to tell you I've been coming to these JFK forums for many years. I'm from South Boston originally. I live in Quincy. It's very easy for me to get here. It's very free. It's very wonderful. I've had a wonderful time, but I think you are the first guest that have ever taken the time to listen and really speak to people here. You've been very compassionate and very inspirational.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't usually say this in public. It's probably the first time I've ever said it in public, but I'm 74 years old. And since I first learned to read at the age of 6, I've started to write. And right away, I started writing poetry, and my first poetry book collection hopefully will be published this year. So
beautiful. What's the title?
God Lights His Candles.
And what's your full name?
Dorothy Morris, M-O-R-R-I-S.
Nice.
All right, but here's my question. I have a major problem, and I wasn't going to bring it up, and I wasn't going to talk about me, but I originally started writing once I retired as a real work. And that was about 10 years ago, and I've started writing a memoir about some tragedy in my life in the 60s. And I grew up in a family of 8 children. I had parents, a very strong-minded family. My mother was a great feminist and very intelligent, very strong-minded. But I want to tell the story, and that's how I started writing. And I have finished the memoir, but it needs at least one more rewrite. I'm very close to my family, probably too close. They're all in this area for the first time in their lives. And the question is about the family truth telling.
Yeah, that's
the
hard.
story is about me, but
Right.
they are threatening my life, really.
Yeah.
If I ever discuss anything that took place
Yeah.
in my Irish Catholic.
Oh, good.
Oh, Lord. Well, you can see we're all 3 now in our heads. I mean, we've all written memoirs. Rick's is coming out this fall. I have to quote Mr. Russo here because he really helped me with this. And I'm sorry, Rick, I'm going to have to do it again. But I think here's what he said. I was tortured with the same thing. My first draft, Dorothy. Is it Dorothy or Dot?
Dottie.
Dottie.
Not Dot, because that's
Dottie. That's different. You're a Dottie. My first draft, someone said years ago, if you're going to write memoirs, you should be able to sue yourself for libel. So I like that. I can do that. Because enough years had passed, I felt like I could be honest about all of my shadow and all of my unattractive parts as a kid. I wasn't prepared to write about my family. In the first draft, I kind of left them out. And my editor, who doesn't know my family, said, typically wisely, again for her, she said, you know, I don't know your family, but it seems like you're leaving out some significant stuff. Yeah. Oh, well, let's see. I'm leaving out that my brother was being sexually abused by a grown woman in our house for 6 years, that he was suicidal, that my sister was gang raped, that she was selling drugs, that my mother was depressed and barely holding on with her fingertips. My father was absent. My other sister was, you know, in a horrible place. I left it all out because I didn't want to violate their privacy. But see, Dorothy, Dottie, that is my story too. How can I write my story without bringing in, right? But Mr. Russo gave me great advice. I was talking to him about this. He had just finished writing an essay about Gloversville, where he grew up. It was published in Granta magazine. He hadn't started writing the memoir yet. Can I quote you, or do you want to say it yourself? No. He said, if it were me, I'll make you sound really good. Yeah. Said, if it were me, he said, I would ask myself, am I trying to skewer anybody with this book? He said, if I came to the conclusion, I'm not trying to hurt anybody with this book. I'm just trying to capture what it was like for me, right, from my emotional, subjective perspective. He said, if I came to the conclusion I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, then I would go ahead and write it. If I came to the conclusion I'd write it, but I wouldn't publish it. And as soon as he said that, I knew I wasn't trying to hurt anybody. I wasn't mad at my mother, my father. I didn't even feel sorry for the boy I'd been or the childhood I'd had. I just felt compelled before I'm dead to capture that piece of my life. And I think if you can answer yes to that, you got to write your truth. Your family still may put a hit on you. And I have bodyguards. No. My family actually have been very generous in their response, and you might be surprised when you write as truthfully and honestly as you can. Back to this intimacy is my own ability to share with you my truth and your ability to reciprocate thing. It may be a gift to your whole family. I think you need to ask, I think that's the litmus test.
I believe now, I didn't at the beginning when I started, it was about me, but you can't write a story without parents and brothers and sisters, especially if you came from a big family. But anyway, I believe now it would be healing for all of them. And I think the truth will set you free. So it's the main thing is to tell the truth. That's what I've learned. And I want to thank you all, and thank you so much. You gave me courage.
That was lovely.
You did great. Yeah?
Thank you.
I loved you protecting me from the nun.